Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A young lady that I think very highly of recommended that I chat with our guest tonight. Moriah Bacus is our guest tonight, and she is an accountability coach. And you know what? Everyone has challenges actually getting things done. We all put together our lists. We all put together these dreams or these strategy, these goals of what we want to do, but actually getting stuff done seems to be a challenge. And so Moriah is this accountability coach and a project manager who helps visionary coaches and consultants get stuff done, ditch the overwhelm, and maintain focused action on their priorities. And I think we all could benefit from learning a little bit about this. Moriah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's such a great opportunity, and I'm hoping I can leave the listeners with some inspiration to start their new year off powerfully, but also wrap up this year with a sense of confidence.
Fantastic. I hope you're right. So how do you get stuff done?
Okay. Well, maybe I can give you a little bit of background about who I am and how I kind of came to this point, because I find that's kind of helpful when we're talking to people about, how I got my experience with this. So my background is in corporate, nonprofit, and small businesses for about 20 plus years. I have about 15 years of project management experience, which I've been able to incorporate into the work that I do today. So I used to work on events, and if you've ever had anything to do with an event, like a fundraising gala or anything like that, you know how much work it is, and there's typically zero flexibility on those deadlines because the event's going to happen, right? So that's how I got my initiation into this world. I had my own business as an event manager, producer, and marketing consultant back in 2011. And then I worked towards getting a certification in project management, which I was able to do in 2017. So that's kind of the first half of it. And then I decided to move into a career in HR in 2019 because I was experiencing a lot of burnout in events. Now, I really loved doing that, but unfortunately the role was cut short due to the pandemic. Like many people lost their jobs at that time. And I was kind of floating around, not really sure what to do. But it led me to starting a habits coaching business, which is another long story for another day.
That was back in business.
Habits coaching business. Yeah. So
good habits or bad habits?
Both. So helping creative professionals break bad habits, old habits, but also helping them start healthy new habits. So did that for a while. But what was interesting is the clients that were coming to me for help with these habits started asking me for help just getting organized, right? Like needing support getting off a paper calendar and onto an electronic calendar and things like that. So I started doing more and more of that type of work. And then I decided, well, let me actually just pivot right into this because this is what people are asking for. And truth be told, habits are not something that a lot of people are eager to jump into working on. So I decided that this made the most sense for me at that time. So I started working with a lot of virtual assistants and other creatives to help support my clients with what they wanted to do. And then this morphed into a VA agency where I started working on things like video post-production and other projects like website builds or helping coaches launch full programs. So I really started enjoying that sort of work, but I had way too many touch points in my business and I was spreading myself way too thin. So this past spring, I decided to kind of like rein that all in and really focus specifically on working with coaches and consultants. So taking these big dreams and these big projects they have and fleshing them out into timelines with small and actionable pieces of work. So this also includes helping them establish some systems and processes. But then the coaching piece that comes into play is helping them work through roadblocks that come up and get in the way. So, I do work with coaches and consultants, but a lot of the information I have to share is really applicable to any solopreneur, small business owner. Anyone could probably benefit from it. So my personal experience is kind of what drives all of this. And a really long time ago, I was 20 years old. I actually escaped a high control group. I was born into it. And it really put me in a situation where I kind of had to start my life over from scratch. And it was during that time that I really didn't have the emotional coping skills to deal with this big thing that had happened in my life. And I started developing a bunch of really nasty habits and addictions. So, it was a really rocky time in my life, but when it comes to habits, I've been able to break a lot of bad habits, including, cigarettes, which is a really big one for a lot of people. But in addition to that, a decade-long addiction to cocaine. So I was able to get through that and come out on the other side. And how I was able to do that was by creating this framework for, not only a happy life, but a productive life, so that I was in action getting things done for myself. And as a result of that, I've been able to make a lot of positive changes that I've been able to stick to, which is pretty cool. And I've had a lot of fun doing it. One example I'd love to share with you is I did a full year of daily yoga in 2021. I only missed 2 days, and I always swear those were accidental. And, a lot of that was due to external accountability, which I would like to touch on a bit later. But really what happened here was that practice of being there every day and showing up for myself is really what helped change my mindset into someone that prioritized wellness, right? So that resulted in a bunch of other changes. It's been almost 2.5 years since I've touched alcohol. And, about 7 months ago, I transitioned to a plant-based diet. So believe it or not, it might not seem connected, but things like project management tools and scheduling strategies like time blocking and time tracking, these are really the things that help me stay accountable. And of course, the external, accountability that's built in when you start telling people about these things you're doing, right? So to wrap it up, essentially, getting my life together, putting this focus on wellness as the foundation of successful entrepreneurship is really what started opening up a lot more doors for me. So when I had started that habits coaching business back at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, I hired a coach, because coaches need coaches, right? And I hired this coach named Rob Gilbert to support me in getting my business off the ground. So the fun part of this is just a short while later, he hired me to help him in his business. And it was to help project manage this book that I'll share with you. It's his bestseller, Die Before They Do. So this is a collection of short stories, which is his memoir. So now this relationship has expanded into something a lot more, where I'm a fractional chief of staff in his business, his accountability coach and project manager, and I also support his group coaching program. So now I'm at the point where I'm waking up every morning super excited to work in and on my business. And I'm really energized by my clients because they're up to these amazing things, right? Like writing books or giving TEDx talks and that sort of thing. And I'm really grateful for everyone that's helped me get to this point and given me opportunities like this one, perhaps with you, this conversation, Brian. So, it's kind of the background. And through this, I've been able to really identify, some kind of key roadblocks that are common across most small business owners and solopreneurs. We often think it's
let's take a break for some messages and come back and talk about some of these roadblocks and how you actually get stuff done, because it sounds miraculous, but is it do we all have to become yoga masters and vegans and health and wellness nuts to do this? Or is this I think you called it time tracking and time scheduling? Are these the secrets to success? Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Moriah, trying to figure out how you get stuff done. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Moriah Bacus. She is an accountability coach and a project manager. She helps coaches and consultants get stuff done, something we all need to figure out how to do better, and ditch the overwhelming stuff and maintain focused action on their priorities. I got this challenge, as we can all see, Moriah. So thank you for your patience and your understanding today. So you've told us a little bit about your background, which sounds like there's a whole story there that I'd love to get into. You were in this control group, and then you had a cigarette addiction, and then you had a cocaine addiction, and my gosh, you got out of all of that. But let's talk about what the roadblocks are that that not just you, but everyone you seem to think has.
Most of us, yeah. So the first one I would talk about would be procrastination or perfectionism. That is a huge one for all of us. The second would be business owners not necessarily taking ownership of their own energy and time management, or taking advantage of the opportunity that's been given to them to design a schedule that works best for them, right? So just sticking to societal norms or maybe what they did in their old corporate role. And then the last piece is a lot of business owners think that they need to go at it alone, and they don't have the trust that they need in order to be able to outsource and start delegating some responsibilities.
So procrastination of perfection, sort of the perfect is the enemy of the good, is what I hear about a lot of time. Let's delve into that. How do you get rid of that? Most people have that. They just put off till tomorrow, or if things aren't perfect, they don't want to do it. They want to. They're not happy with just getting things done 3/4 of the way.
Exactly. So the first thing to keep in mind with any of this work is self-compassion. And you'll be really happy to hear that procrastination is not laziness, like a lot of us might have been told, but it's actually just a form of fear. So it's really helpful to keep that in mind as we work through it. So some examples have how this might show up when you're trying to get something started is a fear of failure, a fear it might be too hard, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to start, that sort of thing. Maybe a fear of disapproval, those sorts of things. And unfortunately, the problem with procrastination is it tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy where you undoubtedly fail because you never even started. So the idea is to start identifying that brand of procrastination based fear so that you can kind of verbalize it and accept it and start working through it. So it's key to start accepting the fact that, yes, there is uncertainty about how this is all going to go. I have no idea, but I'm going to go ahead and, start working through it anyways, right? So identifying what kind of procrastination is this? Do I fear I don't know how to get it done? And then thinking to yourself, am I going to take a small step to start through working through this task? Or am I going to avoid this and keep letting it run my life, right? So a statement you can use is, yes, I'm feeling this fear and I'm going to move forward anyways. So it's kind of like a bit of exposure therapy. You're taking the reins back in small steps so that you can gradually expose yourself to getting used to processing these feelings and moving through things, right? And ultimately, you want to ask yourself, like, what's more important, my fear of doing this thing or the fact that I need to get it done because of XYZ reasons, right? And if we think about failure anyways, if you have any life experience, you know that our greatest lessons come from failures, not really, successes, right? So once you start dealing with that, you'll be able to focus on what you're learning rather than what could potentially go wrong. So two practical strategies to help us move through procrastination are, number one, the 2-minute rule, which James Clear talks about in his book, Atomic Habits, finding the smallest version of that thing or the first 2 minutes of it and getting started with that. It doesn't have to be exactly 2 minutes, but the idea is a very short task, right? And that can create some positive momentum. Okay. So that might be if you're writing a book, like, let me just sit down for 2 minutes and do a quick brain dump. And we all know if we sit down for a couple minutes, it tends to roll into more time. And then the second piece that's really helpful here is accountability partnerships. So partnering up with someone else, you can hold each other accountable. So the reason why this works and the reason why it worked for me when I was doing yoga is pride and ego. Okay, we all want to look good. We all care what people think. So kind of putting it out there that you're doing something makes you really want to hold yourself accountable to it because, you have your ego, your pride that'll be bruised if you don't, right? So an accountability partner is someone who can help hold you accountable, encourage you. And the way you can go about this is finding someone who has a shared goal, maybe someone who's trustworthy, responsible. It could be a friend, a family member, a colleague. But the idea is to create a situation where there's an opportunity to be reminded and give each other constructive feedback in a judgment-free zone. So number one, you want to be clear on what you're trying to achieve with this person, figure out a way to track it. I had a meditation accountability partnership with a friend, and every day we just sent each other a quick meditation check on WhatsApp when it was done. So that's pretty simple. And then figure out, who am I going to choose for this? Do they have similar or comparable experience with these types of goals? And then again, like I mentioned, just being compassionate and don't judge each other because that's not helpful. A supportive arrangement is kind of what works best here for this sort of thing. So those are two strategies we can put into place.
Excellent. Great ideas. And number two was taking ownership of your energy and time management and the opportunity to design a schedule. So you've mentioned this a couple of times now, this sort of time tracking, time schedules. What are these tactics all about?
Sure. So time blocking is simply a time management strategy where we're allocating a specific amount of time to do a task and putting it into our calendar as a time block, a one-off or a recurring event, right? So this is something that I help clients with a lot, and I do workshops on time blocking. And so I recently had a client who had started using time blocking come to me and share that while they did feel more organized, they weren't necessarily honoring those time blocks or protecting them, and they were straying from their schedule. So their question to me was like, well, what do I want? Like, how do I handle a client who wants to have a call at that time when I scheduled it for deep work? So protecting our time and energy, it's kind of comparable to setting boundaries around this, right? So some things to think about when we're creating our schedule that works for us is like, okay, first, what are the working hours? Do they have to be a 9 to 5 because that's what we're used to? Or can we look a bit closer at the time of day that we're productive and maybe schedule our time accordingly? Maybe different times of day are best for deep work or for calls, right? And you probably have a good sense of this already, but what you can do is keep track of your energy levels through a few days and pay attention to what times of day you're most productive, which types of tasks light you up and give you more energy. And that's how you might want to arrange your schedule. Then when it comes to boundaries, are you available at all times for calls? Will you drop something if a client calls? Like, we might want to be accessible to clients, but that might take us off track from other deadlines and commitments we have. So consider, is that the most productive approach? Can you consistently still accomplish what you tried to do that day, even though you're getting constantly interrupted and there's a lot of stops and starts? Like, those are some signs that you might want to rejig your schedule and the access that people have to you.
So
And then,
my challenge is that when I'm in the office, I get interrupted constantly. And so therefore the only time I can actually get my work done is like 6 to 8 o'clock at night. And Friday night, I worked from 6 to 8 o'clock. And it was stupid. Here's a Friday night where I should be out, having a nice dinner or something like that. And I was working for a couple of hours. And the only reason why it was so productive is because no one was bothering me. No one was interrupting me. And if I try to block my time during the day, people say, oh, he's here. And the doors, I can come in and I can get some undivided time with the guy. And then connected issue is your phone call issue. I find that if I don't pick up a phone call when the phone call comes in, it takes me 3 or 4 more tries before I connect with the person. And so that I've wasted a whole bunch of time trying to reconnect. And so if I know someone's available and is there on the line, I want to take advantage of that opportunity, even if it messes up my time. So how do you deal with those two problems?
great point. So I'm hearing that you work in an office with a door. So it might seem a little cruel, but if you've booked that time for deep work, simply putting a sign on your door that says, I'm in deep work mode right now, please come back at 12 p.m. or whatever the case is. So the idea here is not just to spring that new tactic on your team, but to let them know, like, this is something new I'm trying. It's really important that I get things done. I believe in work-life balance. I want to go home and enjoy my Friday night. The other piece is using a calendar booking tool. So there's a tool like, for example, Calendly is one that a lot of people use, where you can set your availability for calls and have people book in at the time that you've chosen. So even if someone does kind of call through last minute, you can always reply to them like, hey, here's my booking link. Would you mind booking in at one of these times? It could be later that day, or it could be first thing the next day. It's assuming it's not an emergency, that sort of thing. But by using a tool like that, you're really taking ownership back and deciding when you have availability to talk with people. So does that help?
Yep.
Do you think those strategies might work?
I think that helps. That sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to this third one about trusting others, about outsourcing and delegating.
Right. So when starting out, we often think we have to do it all. And ultimately that just leads to a lot of stress and burnout and working way too many hours, right? We're meant to be spending our time doing what we do best. And, typically as revenue generating activities, right? And actually doing our jobs. So in the case of coaches or consultants, it's coaching or consulting with their clients, right? So the first thing to do is think about looking for professionals who have worked with similar business models to your own. So a coach would be wanting to look for support for people that have worked with coaches before, right? So that your business model is represented in their processes. Because if we're not, delegating things out, it's really easy for our schedules to be filled up with a bunch of busy work. So we might find ourselves updating our website or our bios or checking our inboxes a million times, right? We need to make sure there's enough time for, big picture thinking, learning new skills and things like that. So focus on delegating things that are repetitive or outside of your zone of genius. And there's a few key places most business owners can look.
Outside of your Genius?
Zone of genius. Look, we all like to think we're geniuses. The first example is one that I suck at, and that's bookkeeping and accounting. So that was the very first thing that I outsourced. It was a lesson I learned in my first business that I did not want to repeat in my second business. If you're not great with numbers, hire an accountant who can help with bookkeeping, cash flow forecasting, tax planning. Not only is it going to save you time and stress, but they can help you make smarter business decisions because they're analyzing your financial data and providing expert advice. So that's one area we can look right away. Website design and maintenance. It's important that our site is easy to navigate. Clients can find the information they need, and it also needs to be accessible, right? So if website design isn't in your wheelhouse, or you find that it's something you enjoy, so maybe you use it as a procrastination tactic, like let me just work on my website instead of doing real work, that's something to look at outsourcing as well. And then to tie in with that would be marketing and social media, right? Like obviously we need to have an active presence on social media if we're a small business owner, but if we're not a marketing expert, we can get caught up in this and not make the right decisions either. So marketing professionals have an up-to-date understanding of platform algorithms and trends that can help you reach a larger audience, but they can also help you with things like social media management. So not just posting or creating content, but actually engaging with followers and viewers, right? So that's an area. And then the last two would be project management support, so similar to what I do, and then basic admin tasks. So these are small, tedious things that take up a lot of energy, like checking inboxes, making appointments, updating databases, and hiring an admin assistant is a really great way to free up that time to focus on revenue generating activities. So
Do these virtual assistants really work?
They do. The thing with VAs is like in hiring any of these support people is you really want to make sure that you are choosing people that share your values, that really understand your business and your goals, and are aligned with your commitment to excellence. And this isn't something that is necessarily turnkey. You do need to kind of work with people, finesse it, help them have opportunities to learn about your business so that they really get off to a great start. It's not something you kind of just throw to someone, right? And I wanted to share this book as a great recommendation from Canadian author Dan Martell called Buy Back Your Time. Huge advice in here about tightening up processes, but also developing a solid plan when it comes to delegating and the order in which we can delegate out things in our business for maximum impact. So I strongly recommend that read.
Sounds like you've got a lot of really good recommendations and ideas for people.
I do, I think. Thanks.
And so if people want to access your services, how do they do that?
Sure. They can reach me on my website. It's vibehighhere.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and on Instagram at vibehighhere.
Vibe High?
Yeah, Vibe High.
That's an interesting name. Tell me about the choice of the name.
I'm glad you asked. So this name was born out of a few experiences I had earlier on where I accepted clients that weren't just a great fit for me, like we sometimes do when we're starting out in business. So when I did a rebrand, I decided to choose a name that would not only signal to potential clients that if they worked with me, they'd be vibing high, but also you're welcome to work with me if you're a high vibe individual. I'm not looking for any drama. So, that's kind of how I landed on the name.
You describe yourself as doing fractional chief of staff work for people. What the heck is that?
Wow. Yeah. So, these were kind of roles that evolved out of the virtual admin side of the business where I was doing a few things for a client and then I was doing more and then I was doing more and more. So it kind of just evolved with two of my clients this way where I started doing so much more in their business that it was kind of beyond admin assistant or project manager. For example, in Rob Gilbert's company, I'm his project manager, accountability coach. I lead one of his weekly group coaching calls. But I'm also providing oversight for the VAs and creatives that work on his team so that he doesn't have to. So it's not necessarily something I start off with people with, but it is something that after a couple of years, the relationship tends to grow and evolve as you learn more about their business and you can do more in their business.
Excellent. Well, this has been really instructive, and I think there's a lot of great suggestions that you've got. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us about it.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Remind us the website people should go to.
vibehighhere.com.
Moriah Bacus is an accountability coach and project manager. She helps visionary coaches and consultants get stuff, and she actually used a different word, but I'm just going to use stuff, done, ditch the overwhelm and maintain focused action on their priorities. Sounds like we could all use a little bit of Moriah Bacus's help. That's an interesting conversation. I'd love to delve further into though some of the things that you talked about from a personal standpoint, and maybe we can chat about that. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've been chatting today with Moriah Bacus, who is an accountability coach and someone who helps us stick to getting things done. And I think that, Moriah, you've given us a wealth of really great ideas in how to do that. But I wonder if I could sort of take a big, huge, giant step back and talk about some of your own personal challenges, because I think that that's how people are really going to understand how you've gotten through some of those issues. You said that you were born into a controlled environment. I don't know if you can clarify exactly what that means, but that sounds kind of interesting. And then in addition, that you were addicted to cocaine for 10 years. Tell me how you got through. Tell me a little bit about those two situations, if you're for comfortable, and how you got through those.
Sure. So I was born into a high control religious organization, so positioning itself as a religion, but the way that it operates actually falls under the category of cult. So this is defined with something known as the BITE model, where behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions are controlled. Okay, so this can range from being told what to wear, what to eat, who you can marry, and all sorts of things along this line. And the thing to keep in mind with organizations like this is the behavior mimics an abusive relationship. So if you could think about bullying and gaslighting, this is baked into the DNA of organizations like this. And anyone can really be susceptible to organizations like this because they do masquerade as warm, welcoming places to start, but you learn more and more after it's too late. And in my situation, I was born into this organization, so I didn't really have a choice. And in fact, I grew up, for lack of a better word, being brainwashed into this lifestyle.
Brainwashed.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
How'd you get out of that?
I was fortunate that I, on my own, exposed myself to alternative sources of media. Now, this is the mid-90s when I was growing up. I had been reading Stephen King and listening to bands like Nine Inch Nails. And these are sources of, media that really ask you to look at things in a different way and open your mind up to different viewpoints. And I started questioning things. I think my critical thinking skills kind of kicked into play. And for whatever reason, my eyes were opened to the hypocrisy within the organization. Now, I had decided...
How did, like, if it's a cult and they control your information and thoughts, how did you actually come to the conclusion that it was hypocritical?
Right. So what I was seeing is people leading what we call double lives. So showing up to church one way, carrying on as if they were following all the rules, but behind closed doors, breaking some of those rules. In fact, I was too. And from my knowledge, I saw other people doing it in the church as well. We were also asked to essentially tell on each other or rat each other out.
Oh, really?
So it was a really toxic environment. And I realized at the time I still believed in God. And I realized at the time for myself, well, if he's really watching and seeing me do all of this, he surely doesn't approve of me living a lie. It made more sense to me to be living an authentic life rather than living a life where I was pretending to follow his rules. So that was kind of how I rationalized it at the time. But I was too young to move out on my own. And so I kind of went through a phase of time where I was really just going through the motions and waiting for an opportunity to graduate from school and get a job so that I could afford to move out. So a situation came up where I made a mistake and I ended up getting pregnant by someone that I worked with. And this was a big deal. I was in a lot of trouble. And I had a situation where my parents found out and they gave me an ultimatum, which led to me having to leave. I was 20 years old. I had the emotional maturity maybe of a 17 or 18-year-old, and I had literally just started my first full-time job after college. So it was a really rough time. I 3 months later ended up with a miscarriage. And then at this point, it was like, how do I rebuild my life? Part of what happens with this organization is that if you have been baptized in and you decide to do something outside of the bounds, break the rules, you are what's called disfellowship. So it's kind of similar to like an excommunication that you might be familiar with. But the brutal part is your entire family and friends, your whole world as you know it, they shun you. So that means cutting off communication, relationships. And I'm talking like immediate family, best friends, people I had grown up with. And because you're not allowed to be a part of the outside world, to maintain friendships with kids at school, for example, or people at work, when this happens, you're left with nothing, right? So this is where I really had to start rebuilding and maybe reaching out to some friends from high school that I didn't know too well and starting to deepen those relationships, right? And as you can imagine, with this lack of emotional maturity, I didn't have emotional coping skills. So this is where I was really susceptible to getting into bad habits, because bad habits are just a way for us to cope with emotions when we don't know how to deal with them with healthy tools. So we typically reach for the first thing that makes us feel better. For some people, that's food, or it's shopping, or it's alcohol, or it's drugs, or it's gambling, or whatever it is. And because it works for us in that moment, we keep going back to it. But it's not an actual solution to the emotional pain we're feeling. So that's kind of the first part of how I got to that point where I started developing addictions. I ran into crowds who were partying a lot, started doing party drugs, and then one thing led to another.
My God, when I first started chatting with you, I had no idea you went through this. I'm so sorry, but it seems like you've come through fine, which is amazing. You must have an incredible resilience in your personality and your attitude. So, do you not speak with your family at all now?
We did get back in touch when the pandemic happened. I think things shifted for a lot of people in their relationships during that time. So we did get back in touch. We have sporadic communication now, but certainly not the kind of relationship you would hope to have with your parents. I'm just grateful to be back in sporadic communication with them, to know what's happening with them and that sort of thing. But yeah, unfortunately, they're still a part of this group, and really it's all they've ever known. And, when you're in it, everything outside of it is demonized, and it's just really hard to see past that brainwashing. So I can't fault them for that.
So you were emotionally immature, you described, and so therefore you started getting into party drugs, and you became addicted to cocaine for 10 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll share the path I took, and like everyone's situation is unique. And I should preface this by saying, like, I'm not a health professional. So, what worked for me might not work for everyone else. And we should definitely be referring to medical professionals for support. But, what kind of started this was partying. But then I decided to work part-time in the nightlife industry. It was that, in combination with a living situation with a partner who I was with for 10 years, where cocaine was readily available at home. So this is how I ended up in a daily habit. It's highly addictive, and it was just too easily accessible to me. So while I was in the relationship, I tried to negotiate with that situation. Like, can we cut back? Can we take a break? Like those sorts of things. But I wasn't, unfortunately, able to gain their cooperation in making changes at that time. So, like, ultimately, the first step to stopping this habit was removing myself from the situation. And this is like a kind of core habit strategy, is make things difficult or hard. Removing yourself from the situation is like creating some distance from it, right? So I moved out, and that stopped the daily use, which was great, but I hadn't actually changed my mindset. And this is something I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. And this example can be applied to any kind of habit we want to break, right? So I knew that cocaine was a problem for me, But even after I moved out, I continued to allow it to be a part of my life. So, like, I would step into familiar patterns, like dating people with that habit, making justifications and allowances for myself, like, oh, I'll only do it on special occasions and I can keep this under control, right? But what I found was those special occasions like Christmas or New Year's would just like spill over into a whole month. Or a fun date with someone who used would turn into a 6 month relationship where I was back using every weekend. So I managed to avoid those things, and my use decreased over the years that followed. And part of that was just being single, focusing on my work, and focusing on like improving my financial situation. So really sticking to those priorities. I was out less, so that meant like less association with people who were using and like less cues from those environments that I associated with using, right? So, but again, it was less and less, but I still hadn't shifted my mindset. Okay. So I still saw myself as a user, as an addict. And I was really just kidding myself into believing that like moderation would be an effective strategy for me. So, what would happen if someone offered it to me is I didn't really have a strong conviction. I would be like, oh, no thanks. Like, I'm trying to quit. But then a little bit of rationalization and I would just give in. So, I just kept holding this belief like this drug is always going to be a challenge for me. And I had some bad experiences the last few times that I used, but it still wasn't enough motivation for me to change. So, where things
Bad
really
experiences
changed.
like what? Can you share any of that?
A friend asked me to get together to spend some quality time. I thought we were there to have a deep conversation and get to know each other more. And she just wanted to do coke and party and not speak. So it was just a lot of starting to see where I was just not aligned with the lifestyle anymore. Like those sorts of things where, oh, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't the kind of experience I hoped for, and that sort of thing. Or in combination with drinking, ending up in like dangerous situations. I was frankly too old to be putting myself in situations like that, right? So you're not in control of your actions. You make poor choices. Your inhibitions are reduced, right? And bad things happen. Um, but things did change for me at the beginning of the pandemic. So early 2020, strangely enough, like being a part of COVID related layoffs and having this forced isolation, it was a miracle for me because it gave me this respite from this like nonstop hustle that I didn't know I needed so badly. And I really started to thrive being home and alone because I had this abundance of time and space to just go inward and really think about what's working in my life and what is not. And I started just doing the work for myself and with the support of a coach. So the first thing here was getting clear on my personal values. You know, you ask people like, what are your values? What do you stand for? And oftentimes we have trouble articulating it or we haven't taken the time to think about it. What actually do I stand for? And so I started getting clear on what my personal values were. So like integrity and ambition, right? And it was when I was working on wellness habits, like getting consistent with weekly food prep and, you know, regular exercise. I then started adopting this mindset of someone that prioritizes wellness. So this was the first kind of mindset shift I started to have. And it was when that was happening, I was also starting to get clear on the fact that I was no longer the type of person who did cocaine. Like those two identities, the old me and the new me that I was becoming, they were in conflict. So,
Did you actually sit down and think through who that new me was?
mm, yeah, there was a lot of journaling, self reflection, conversations with my coaches. It was just a lot of time spent in reflection and meditation. I was also starting to work on building my habits program for clients. So, in a sense, starting to put together some of the work for them was actually helping me do the work on myself too. And like, there was one defining moment that I'll never forget. I was talking to someone and cocaine was brought up in the conversation as something we could do for this event that was coming up. And I was so triggered. Like it felt so wrong for me in my core. Like I started to almost shake. it was like a gut reaction. And my response was like an immediate, absolute, I don't do chemicals. And like, to be honest, it was the first time I actually believed it. I surprised myself. And like the words coming out of my mouth were now aligned with the type of person I had become, right? So while it was triggering, maybe because it was such a new experience for me, being in this new identity, ultimately it was so empowering and freeing to step into that. Like I finally felt like I wasn't in limbo with the bad habits anymore. So like what I had done previously is what a lot of people do when they're approaching a new habit or working on self-improvement, right? Like it goes something like, if I want to be fit, that's an outcome. I'm going to stick to this workout routine and then I'll be fit. So like a process, right? But the problem with taking that like outcome and process approach is we haven't shifted the way we look at ourselves. So the old identity can sabotage us even if we have really good intentions to change. And it's really hard to change habits if you haven't changed those limiting beliefs, right? The new behaviors are in conflict with the old identity, and it starts this tug of war where it's so much easier to slip into the old behaviors because we still see ourselves as that person. So I want to say when it comes to identity, there are certain frameworks and programs, you'll probably know what I'm referring to, where for some people, they're asked to identify as an alcoholic or an addict. And I take issue with those processes personally because
So AA or something like that, you don't believe in?
I think that they're helpful for a lot of people. But the one piece of it, not having gone through it myself, so I can't speak from experience, but being asked to identify as an alcoholic or being asked to identify as an addict till the end of time, to me, that's a label that sticks. It's my opinion that those labels could potentially and likely, in my opinion, make it harder for folks to actually change the underlying identity.
So
Right.
you haven't gone to AA or rehab or something
No,
like that.
no,
So you were
no.
able to actually do this on your own
Yeah.
with coaches.
With coaches, with support, and with the mindset shift.
This
So
is absolutely a fascinating conversation. I think really valuable to people, but we've got to take a break for some messages. And so we're going to take a break for 2 minutes and come back with
sure.
Moriah and some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our guest tonight has got a really fascinating background. Moriah Bacus is a accountability coach. She runs an organization where she provides advice to people on how to get stuff done, and we've chatted about that. But she also has gone through really quite a dramatic life experience, and she's been sharing some of that life experience with us. We've only got a few minutes left, Moriah. It seems like you've been able to do this not completely on your own, but primarily on your own, both leaving the cult as well as leaving cocaine and your addiction behind. A lot of people need to go through AA or go to rehab to do that. I've heard lots of stories of people that don't go to rehab or AA relapse on a fairly regular basis. And it sounds like you haven't. What's the secret? How have you done this? You said it was something about a mindset shift,
It's
or something about a vision of the new you. How did you actually do this? Where does your resilience come from?
Well, the resilience probably came from having to start my life completely over from scratch. That was the experience that taught me how to do everything on my own, right? And that no one was coming to save me, right? That sort of thing. But the important thing to keep in mind with the habits is this mindset shift. If we don't change our mindset in terms of how we identify ourselves, we'll always identify as that old version of ourselves. So part of maintaining the mindset is sticking to new healthy habits. So while I was able to get rid of things in its place, putting new habits into place that reinforce that new identity as someone who prioritizes health and wellness. And, like that's just now opened up a completely new chapter in my life that feels completely different. And I'm definitely open to having conversations with anyone that would like to chat with me about this. I know it's a difficult topic, but if my experience is able to support someone else in their journey, I'm more than happy to speak to folks about that if they reach out to me.
One of the things that I think you've done, and maybe you agree or disagree, I'm not sure, is that you've replaced bad habits with good habits. And I've been a firm believer that that's one of the secrets, is that you have triggered events, whatever they may be, that caused you to do something that was deemed a bad habit. Take cocaine, alcohol, party, whatever that thing might be. Eat, smoke, and it's difficult to just get rid of something without replacing it. And so therefore actually finding something good to replace it. In your case, maybe it was this daily yoga, maybe it was becoming vegan, maybe it was, I don't know. But what do you think of that idea that replacing a bad habit with a good habit, and not sort of saying, I'm not going to have a triggering event. I'm still going to have that trigger that says I want to do something. I'm just going to, when I have that, I'm going to want to do something good rather than do something bad. Is that a helpful way to think things through?
Absolutely important. If you even just think about it from a how your time is spent position. So when you're an addict, your time is spent making sure you have your supply. That becomes the number one priority. So it's getting the supply, doing the thing, and then maybe there's anxiety or fallout from it, right? So there's all this time wrapped up in this habit. So when you're removing the habit, how are you spending that time? If you don't have hobbies or other practices in place that can step in, you end up with idle hands, right? And it's harder to stay away from those things. So I think the approach can be twofold, where you're working on getting rid of the habits, but looking at what else can I put in its place, as you said, like to replace that habit. So even just from that perspective, it helps. And then the new healthy habits, again, they're helping reinforce this new identity as whatever, someone who prioritizes wellness or someone who's focused on health. So as the new identity is being enforced, the old you is fading away. And yes, we can make mistakes and go off track, but you want to think about it as making one right choice today is a step in the right direction. You might make a wrong choice tomorrow, but try to take 2 steps in the right direction the next day, right? So every choice we're making for ourselves is like a vote for the new person that we're becoming.
Moriah, this has been an inspirational conversation. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank
sharing
you.
your personal history, and congratulations on escaping the cult and escaping cocaine and quitting cigarette smoking. I'm not sure about going vegan. I still want my steak, so I'm not going to congratulate you on that one. But on the others, I will. And thank you for sharing your ideas as well on accountability coaches and time management, because that's pretty important in life too. If people want to access your accountability sessions and ideas and services, how do they best do that?
Well, the best way to reach me is my website, vibehighhere.com. I'm an open networker, so they can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. The handle is vibehighhere.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'll remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Moriah. That was really interesting.
Thank you.